Today we'll be taking a look at the SIHOO Doro C300 Pro V2. Coming in at around $500, SIHOO claims that this is a full-body adaptive ergonomic chair, meaning it doesn't just support you in a fixed position. This chair is designed to move with your body in real time as you shift around and recline. And while this is an interesting pitch, I wanted to find out whether it's actually delivering on something meaningful or just marketing language. So I've been testing this chair for about a week now in my main setup, so in this video I'll be giving you my full review. But before we get into it, I just want to mention that this video is sponsored by SIHOO. That said, they are only paying me for my production time and not my opinion. Everything I'm about to tell you in this video is based on actually using this chair day to day, and I'll be giving you my honest take on what works and what doesn't. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into the review, starting with the design. The C300 Pro V2 has a very clean, modern aesthetic. It's a full mesh chair, and the overall look is pretty similar to what you'd expect from something like a Herman Miller Aeron. Minimalist, professional, but nothing too flashy. In terms of color options, it comes in black and white, which are both really solid classic options that'll fit in a home office or a professional workspace without standing out in the wrong way. I have the white version and I think it looks really good. For a $500 chair, it reads reasonably premium at first glance. It definitely doesn't look like a budget chair in my opinion. The all-mesh design gives it that nice high-end office chair silhouette with clean lines. Now there are some build quality notes that I'll get into in a second, but from a pure design standpoint, it holds up pretty well for the price. That said, when it comes to materials and build quality, my overall take is that it's decent for the price, but it's not going to blow you away. This is still a sub $500 chair, and it does show in a few places. So the C300 Pro V2 is BIFMA certified on the whole chair, not just for the individual components, which means it's going to be built pretty well. The base is a 6-piece aluminum construction that you need to assemble yourself. It works fine and feels pretty stable, but a lot of competing chairs at this price point will use a single piece base that just feels a little bit more refined out of the box. Now this is not going to affect how the chair actually performs, but just something to be aware of during setup. Now the mesh itself is what SIHOO calls their cloud mesh, and this is used on both the seat and the backrest. It has good elasticity, a soft feel, and it's very breathable. The quality of the mesh feels solid and like it'll hold up over time. That said, I did notice some discoloration on the backrest mesh of my unit. It doesn't change how the chair performs at all, but it really does kind of stand out on the white version, so it's worth flagging. I also noticed some minor cosmetic defects on the plastic components. Again, nothing that'll affect the actual comfort or functionality, but still worth mentioning. Another thing to point out is that since the chair has so many adjustment options and moving parts, which we'll get into in a bit, there's some noticeable play in areas like the backrest, seat pan, and headrest. Now that's pretty hard to avoid when you have so many adjustment points, but it does mean that the chair feels a little bit less solid and locked in. It's kind of just a trade-off that you're going to need to make in exchange for the adaptability. But with that said, now let's talk about some of the features and adjustability, because there's a lot going on here. Now the headline feature is what SIHOO calls their DynaCore system. The idea is a 4-zone coordinated tracking system covering the head, lumbar, back, and arms. The chair uses real-time gravity sensing, so the chair responds and adapts as you move rather than holding you in one static supported position. Now a common issue with nearly all mesh chairs is that they force you into a fixed position. Since they pretty much all have a rigid plastic frame that they use to wrap the mesh around, they'll lack flexibility, which will limit your movement. But the C300 Pro V2 is one of the only chairs that addresses this issue by having the components actually move with you as you shift around rather than flexing. Now working alongside that is the SynchroFlex system, which is essentially the backrest gliding up and down as you recline and shift around. The goal of this is to keep your back in the right supported position throughout the full range of your movement. And we'll get into how well both of these features actually work in the comfort section. Most of your main adjustments are controlled by a single lever on the right side of the chair. Lifting it adjusts your seat height, which is pretty standard. Twisting this lever forward controls your seat pan depth, which is good for accommodating people of different leg lengths. The general rule of thumb when adjusting your seat pan is that you want to be able to fit 2 fingers of space between the front edge of the seat and the back of your knee. This will kind of minimize pressure on the back of your legs and thighs. Now twisting the lever backward opens up the recline and handles your tilt lock. When the lever is in the middle position, the backrest is locked upright. Then you can twist it back to open up the recline and then lean back to your preferred angle. From there, you can twist the lever back to the neutral position to lock it into place. You get up to 135 degrees of recline with 3 defined positions. 105 degrees for focused work, 120 degrees for a more relaxed position, and a full 135 degrees for a deep rest. The C300 Pro uses a weight-activated recline mechanism, meaning the recline resistance automatically adapts to your body weight. This means that there's no manual tilt tension knob to fiddle with. Now some people do prefer having manual control over your tilt tension, but I'd say the weight adaptive system works pretty well in practice, and having one less thing to adjust is a reasonable trade-off for most people. Overall, the adjustability on this chair is pretty impressive for the price. And despite how much is going on, I found it pretty intuitive to use. Having everything accessible from a single lever means that you're not crawling under the chair to find a hidden knob. So now let's talk about the actual comfort of the chair, starting with the seat. Now mesh seats are definitely polarizing. Some people love them and some people can't stand them. But I'll say this, from my experience, the C300 Pro V2 has one of the most comfortable mesh seats I've ever tried at any price point. Now the seat has a bucket style design with raised side bolsters, similar to what you'd find on a Herman Miller Aeron. That said, the seat is wide enough so that I never felt trapped or restricted, and the bolsters didn't dig into my hips during normal use. But if you're on the larger side or have wider hips, it's still worth keeping in mind. And like most mesh seats, the mesh wraps around a hard plastic frame, so cross-legged sitting isn't really comfortable here. Keep this in mind if you're someone who likes to do that regularly. What really makes this seat stand out to me is the elasticity of the mesh. A really common issue with mesh seats is that the mesh is pulled so tight that it creates an uncomfortably firm sit. The C300 Pro V2 hits a really good balance. You sink into the seat just enough so that you get that suspended hammock feel that mesh seats are known for, while still feeling properly supported underneath. It doesn't bottom out at all, and you don't feel like you're sitting on a trampoline. Personally, I think they really nailed it here. The other thing I really appreciate is the lack of pressure under my legs. A lot of mesh chairs will use a foam pad in the front of the seat, which causes your hips to sink below the foam level and creates a creasing effect that puts pressure on the back of your thighs. The C300 Pro ditches that design and instead uses a waterfall front edge that keeps your legs from coming into contact with the hard plastic frame. Now this design is what we'll typically see in kind of higher end mesh chairs like the Herman Miller Aeron Remastered. From my experience, I feel basically zero pressure under my thighs during long sessions, which is a big deal for comfort over time. And the mesh is also very breathable, so if you tend to run warm while sitting, then this is going to be a much better experience than a foam or fabric seat. Now moving on to the backrest, this is where the SynchroFlex system comes into play. As you recline and shift around, the backrest physically slides up and down to keep your back in a properly supported position. The problem that this is trying to solve is a real one. I've noticed on most split back mesh chairs, the second you recline or shift, you end up coming into contact with the hard outer plastic frame, which digs into your back and feels terrible. The SynchroFlex system does a good job of preventing that. I found that my back stayed in the right zone even as I moved around, which is more than I can say for a lot of chairs with this design. My main complaint is that the sliding mechanism is constantly moving by design, and sometimes I just want a firm, locked-in surface to lean my back into, especially during focused upright work. Now you can lock the tilt angle when sitting upright, but whenever you want to make micro movements in the chair, you can still feel that sliding mechanism doing its thing. And in my opinion, it can just feel a little unsettled. A lock option for the sliding mechanism would go a long way here in my opinion. The way it's currently designed, it'll constantly be sliding up and down, and you really have no control over that. Now when it comes to the lumbar support, it's definitely one of the better executed parts of the chair. SIHOO calls this the self-adaptive dynamic lumbar support, and it works by physically sliding as you recline, which keeps it hitting the right sweet spot of your lower back throughout your movement or range, rather than riding up awkwardly like lumbar supports tend to do on most split back mesh chairs. I find that this is a real problem on a lot of chairs in this category, and the C300 Pro V2 handles it noticeably better. You also get 3 firmness levels: firm for upright work, gentle for shorter breaks, and sacrum support for when you're reclined. These are controlled by a lever on the back of the chair. This is a mesh lumbar support, and I found that the mesh has enough softness that it doesn't push you aggressively forward, and the coverage is wide enough so that you're not feeling the plastic edges digging into your back when you shift around. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty good lumbar support in my opinion. Now I find that a lot of split back mesh chairs really mess this up, but I think SIHOO did a really good job with this one. When it comes to the armrest, they are marketed as 8D bionic armrest, which covers pretty much every adjustment point that you can think of. You get height, depth, inward and outward rotation, tilt, and you can even flip the rear section 36 degrees. These armrests also recline back with you, which makes them actually useful for when you're lounging. The range of motion on most of these adjustments is pretty good. That said, these arms are not perfect. Now my main complaint with them is that the height range didn't go low enough for me personally. At the lowest position, they still push my shoulders up slightly, which can be fatiguing over longer sessions and makes it harder to slide the chair under a desk. Now you can rotate them out of the way or use the downward tilt to get closer to your desk without bumping into the edge, so there are workarounds. But when it comes to the arm pads themselves, they're thick and comfortable, though the rounded shape does kind of make it easy to slip off occasionally when shifting around. But the bigger issue for me is that a lot of the adjustments are pretty loose since they don't lock into place. I constantly find myself unintentionally bumping them out of position or having the depth adjustment slip as I shift around or get up out of the chair. Now it's not as bad when I'm actively using them with my weight resting on them, but it does come up pretty frequently throughout a normal sitting session. Aside from that though, they're generally pretty comfortable armrests to use. The headrest is an ultra-wide 3D design with height, depth, and angle adjustments. The ratcheting depth adjustment is easy to use while you're actually sitting in the chair, and the range of motion is solid for covering both upright and reclined positions. The mesh is comfortable, and the headrest itself holds its position pretty well during use. Now I will say there is a little bit of play due to all the adjustment options, but nothing that significantly affects the overall experience. Now what I really like about this headrest is how wide it is. It's wide enough so that you don't have to worry about your head drifting off to the edge and coming into contact with the hard plastic frame. Overall, it's a pretty good headrest. It's comfortable, breathable, and versatile enough to work in multiple sitting positions. So now let's talk about whether the $500 is worth it for this chair. At this price point, you're kind of sitting at the lower end of the premium ergonomic market. Now, if you compare this to something like a Herman Miller Aeron, that's going to run you close to $2,000. The C300 Pro V2 isn't going to match that in terms of overall build quality and refinement, but it is doing something genuinely different with these adaptive features that you just won't find from those brands. So if you're someone who tends to move around a lot while sitting, shifts between focus work and a more reclined position throughout the day, or has struggled with lumbar support that drop out of position when you recline, then the C300 Pro V2 is addressing problems that even expensive mesh chairs haven't really solved, and is doing that at a fraction of the price of those flagship alternatives. On the policy side, SIHOO backs this chair with a 3-year warranty and free shipping, and you get a 30-day free return window to try it out in your actual setup. So you get decent policies with this chair. A 3-year warranty isn't amazing for this price point, but it's still pretty solid. Overall, I came away from testing the C300 Pro V2 with a pretty positive impression. The mesh seat is generally one of the most comfortable I've used at any price point, the adaptive lumbar support actually delivers on what it promises, and the overall adjustability is impressive and more intuitive to use than you'd expect given how much is going on. So if you're interested in checking it out, I'll have an affiliate link down in the description. If you have any questions about this chair, drop them in the comments below. And if you found this review helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more.